Good day and welcome to Plenary Discussion 2, Deliberations on the National Charter with Legs and Teeth. I'm Kimberley Tull, Director, Community and Learning Partnerships and Access Pathways at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and I'm serving as your moderator. This afternoon, we have 5 speakers who will be sharing their reflections on what should be included in a national charter. So without further delay, I will invite Robert Summerby-Murray, President and Vice-Chancellor, St. Mary's University, to bring his remarks.
Thanks very much, Kimberley, and welcome everybody. Thank you for the tremendous level of engagement over the last 2 days. It seems to me that we're building momentum here that is so commendable, and we're continuing to listen and move towards action and implementation. Just very quickly, I wanted to pull together 3 outstanding or overriding principles from my perspective as we reflect on the last 2 days. They are perspectives and principles around the engagement of students and student experience, the significance of communities, and I say that in plural, communities, and then the third, the courage of leadership. And those are 3 principles that I suggest we look carefully at in terms of building into the Charter itself as a framework document, a guiding document for so many of us. Let me just begin quickly with students. I had the pleasure of sitting through elements of the access and success for students. What does this mean? What does it look like? We need to keep listening. I know to say we continue to listen can be a challenging statement, but it's very clear that listening to students and understanding the needs of students and the experiences that they have is important in terms of framing up getting to post-secondary environments of many ways. So listening remains important. Similarly, access and pathways, how we work with the students to create those pathways, those aspirations, those opportunities for career development and learning is another component of why I think that sense of listening to students is a key principle in the Charter itself. That extends to mentoring, curriculum development, leadership. And if we can hold on to that principle of listening to students and putting students' needs first as a principle, I think we will be well served. None of that will be possible without a principle of engaging communities, and communities plural. It's very clear that we need to keep working internally with communities and externally with communities in the design work that we have and in the implementation work. This is not a situation of specific institutionals looking outwards or looking in. There needs to be a stronger set of partnership. So community partnership for me is one of the things I'm taking away as a principle that we should give strong consideration to as we move forward. We do know that the Academy is founded on principles of privilege that has been built around a culture of whiteness over centuries. And as we undo that, remodel that, engaging communities around us will be an important part of a new paradigm. Examples of that include working to recruit students, working with communities. And this is not as I say, a them and us for an institution. It's a much broader base to that. Similarly for curriculum. As we develop curricular change and change the nature of discovery and inquiry, this has to draw upon communities. There are some great examples of this, and we've heard some of those in the last few days. It extends to research relationships as well, in engaging the community around all of us as we work together. And a final principle I heard articulated very strongly in a session today was the courage of leadership. What we are all doing is engaging, and we need to ensure that the positionality of decision and positionality of leadership is engaged in this as well. For the Charter to be successful and to have meaningful impact, we need to take it on ourselves as all participants in this national dialogues, and we need to recognize the strength that working together on this brings for all of us. We're all in very different places in terms of our institutional responses, challenges, and opportunities. And so we need to recognize that as well. We need to recognize the different accountabilities that we bring to this. But if we can elevate that to a much larger space through a framework, through a charter, then we will have given all of us a bolstering of courage for the leadership that each of us carries out in that particular components of our post-secondary world. So 3 key principles from my perspective: the importance of keeping student experience first, engaging with communities and making sure that we are community in a very inclusive way, that reflects so well on Melinda Smith's comment yesterday in terms of the importance of equity deserving groups. And so let's make sure that we are engaged in that. And then the final point around a principle of leadership and the courage to lead for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we'll have a moment to reflect and provide dialogue amongst the panelists a little bit later, but we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Marie-Claude Rigaud, Special Advisor and Associate Secretary General, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion and Indigenous Relations, Associate Professor, Faculty of Law at the University of Montreal.
Thank you very much, Kimberly, and thank you to the organizers of these dialogues for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts. I propose to offer comments that will apply to the overall structure and content of the Charter, inspired by what I've heard over the last 2 days. The national dialogues in which we've engaged in yesterday and today have confirmed the need, I believe, for us to recognize that what has been done to address anti-Black racism and inclusion so far is not sufficient, and that there's a need for further action and for immediate action. The dialogues were convened with the idea and a vision for the adoption of a national charter of principles, actions, and accountabilities on anti-Black racism and inclusion. As these first dialogues come to a close today, it's clear that we're now closer to the reality of a timely drafting, signing, and embracing of a national charter. Recognizing that universities and colleges must hear the call for social and political mobilization challenging racism, the Charter will provide an edifice on which we can lean on to orient change, from which we can draw inspiration and strength to effectuate most needed change. Having participated in the dialogues, I believe we are many to leave these days with the hope that the national charter will be an instrument that will set specific time-bound commitments accompanied by targeted measures that weave through the universities and colleges' various missions. We hope that, and I think I speak on behalf of many people I've heard, that the instrument will be one of cohesion, that will provide some clarity, direction to orient some meaningful change for students, for faculty, for staff. And I stress the word staff because that's one I would say, a group that was often said to have been forgotten in the discussions, but that attention should be paid to. So students, faculty, staff, obviously orient meaningful change also on the type of research we produce, on the type of research we choose to focus on the stories we tell, the training we develop, the teaching we offer as professors and as part of the university. The hope was also voiced that the Charter would be a tool, a strong voice that will set out and open the door for intentional opportunities all along the continuum and in every sphere in which the university or a college plays a role, as a place of learning, a place of training, a place where research is generated, a place of work, a place of life, a place where decisions that impact us all are taken every day. A charter that would be hopefully a tool that makes us all in our respective communities, but also within our human community, accountable for change. A charter that recognizes the unique roles and responsibilities that colleges and universities play in our societies across the nation. As universities and colleges, I believe we are best positioned to create bridges towards all levels of education and to lead and impose change. Building these bridges seem to me perhaps a better image than working on the pipelines, although I don't of course put into question the need to do so. That has been talked over in every session that I've participated in, this need to work on all levels of education. And as I indicated, I believe that universities and colleges are in a very privileged position to work on this and have a responsibility to lead the way. As a community within a broader community, we have the power and responsibility not only to inspire, but also to lead this change. Many voiced the hope that the Charter would be a flexible and dynamic instrument, of course, but more importantly, a courageous one that will dare to be ambitious, dare to be brilliant, with built-in accountability mechanisms. Accountability is a word that I heard voiced many times over the course of the last 2 days. A charter that can be a catalyst for change, a roadmap to help others who must also combat racism. The charter will hopefully itself offer a helping hand to other similar initiatives and must therefore be inclusive. A tool that will enable universities and colleges to rethink our language, where notions such as equity deserving can reframe our thinking. Let us not forget that words are a form of action. They lay out our commitments. They inform our next steps. They remind us not to lack courage, to stay true to what we're saying today and to the promises we will be making. The voice and the hope was also voiced that the charter will not limit itself to setting out what is convenient, but would also propose solutions, actions that are needed because they are right for staff, for students, for faculty, our institutions, and our communities. A charter that would replace what has often been framed as well-intentioned actions, but a somewhat fragmented approach to addressing racism. The charter offers a space for all of the pieces of the puzzle to come together and to be structured around a definite text. A charter that would inspire others to see the effect of a real and deliberate effort to invent a better version of ourselves. And on a more personal note, a charter that calls us, universities and colleges, to see dialogues not only as a noun, but also as a verb. The action of partaking in an exchange with the intent of reaching an agreement, something which, in my view, we must continue to do and value. Thank you for the organizers of these days. Thank you for the participants. Thank you for the opportunity to engage in these dialogues. And I look forward to hearing my colleagues' comments and observations, and to the next steps. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. Our next speaker is Kofi Campbell, Vice President, Academic, and Dean, University of Waterloo.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, I'm at Renison University College, which is affiliated with the University of Waterloo. That is where I'm a vice president. Thank you very much. I was actually moderating a panel just before this, so you will forgive me, I am sure, if I am slightly less polished than the preceding speakers. What I have done is to really jot down a series of points which perhaps we'll have the opportunity to explore in greater depth as we move into our discussion. But there are certain elements which both myself and the general group with which I've been engaged over the last 2 days have really honed in on. I think the first one is one that Marie-Claude really just touched on very, very well, which is the question of accountability. The question of accountability is really going to be central to this work and to the efficacy of any charter which does come out of this work. It is absolutely necessary, I think, that our efforts be very public-facing, that they be done very publicly and openly and very, very transparently. And let us be clear as well that to some degree, this is what spurs universities forwards in doing this kind of work. There's a reason the conference is happening right now. There's a reason we are having this conversation right now and not 5 years ago or 10 years ago when these exact issues existed and were going on. It is because public opinion is now on our side. And to a large degree, universities, institutions of higher education, are risk-averse institutions which are very jealously guard their public image. I think to some degree that public-facing aspect of this work will ensure that it gets done in a very good way, not with an aim to shaming people who don't do the work. Rather, I would suggest, as has been suggested elsewhere, a portal where we can share the successes of those universities and colleges who move forward in this work in a robust manner. Let us set reasonable metrics. Let us set reasonable timeframes. Not, we'll see what this looks like in 10 years, but what can we do over the next year? What can we do this semester? It is very easy to get lost in the ether of long-term goals. It is very easy to push things off for the next year. I think this charter should call very strongly for the work to be undertaken by those with expertise in the area. Expertise in doing anti-racism work, expertise in doing anti-Black racism work. Institutions can too often put this work onto the most convenient Black body, the first Black body that they can reach out to. that does not mean that that person has expertise. And to some degree, that approach is, of course, itself very racist. Black bodies are not interchangeable. Black people are not interchangeable. What is required in this work is not a Black person. It is a person with lived experience and with expertise and experience in doing this kind of work. I agree very much with Robert that external partners and community engagement are absolutely necessary. We must engage with politicians, with industry, with advocacy groups, with all of those communities who to some degree support us and who to some degree push us as well. Though that external pressure can also be very useful in moving our work forward, but also the work we're doing is for the public. It is to make our country and the world a better place. We must engage then with those communities. Students, I cannot stress enough how important I think it is that students are here. The one criticism I've heard leveled over the last 2 days is that this conference was not student heavy enough, that there were not enough student voices here. I think that that's an important point for us to consider and to take on. Students are they're our largest constituency. They fund us. They determine our existence to some degree. It is very important that we not just wait until students are upset and make a big fuss, which we have seen lately they can and do to great turmoil for institutions, but also they know how to get results. We can learn from students. And I would suggest that as senior administrators, we must reach out proactively to students. We don't wait for them to come to us with their problems. We should reach out to student leaders. We should make continuing regular appointments with them. We should speak to them all the time because they understand in ways that we have long forgotten what it's like to live as a student. We really must heed their voices. There must be a mechanism for the sharing of best practices. We must create space for people who are dedicated to doing this work. We must, as institutions, be willing to give a quarter or a half of someone's time to this project so that they can work alongside other people in a dedicated way towards this. It is too easy for this work to become buried under the weight of our other obligations. We must make a space for it. My 1 point, data, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. As I've heard Melinda say many times, how can we possibly serve our students well if we don't know who they are? How can we serve our faculty and staff well if we don't know who they are? The bravery of leadership, I just want to come back to that notion of Robert's. It is absolutely important. Thank you very much for saying that, Robert. It is at the heart of this work. On a final note, we must work towards representation at all levels. We often think of representation as being embedded in the senior administration, but we must think of how many important decisions are made in HR, how many important decisions are made in our unions, how many important decisions are made by our advising staff. All of those areas where students, faculty, and staff encounter the institution and each other are sites of decision-making where we must have adequate representation all the way through. On a final note, President Fearon raised an issue that I hadn't considered and which my panel was very excited about, but representation beyond the university as well. What do the granting agencies, what do they look like? When a Black faculty member or a Black graduate student submits a grant application, who's reading that application? Is there a diverse enough group of people who can actually address some of the issues that may come up in those grant applications? An institution like SSHRC has the capacity to shape the research landscape of the entire country. How well represented are we on SSHRC committees? I could go on, but I think I will leave this for the moment. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very excited by this conference, and I'm very excited by the possibilities of this charter. Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi. Lots of food for thought there, and I'm going to hold my tongue until we get to the dialogue. Next speaker is Kelly Hannah Moffat, Vice President, Human Resources and Equity, University of Toronto, St. George. Kelly.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'd like to thank all the participants and all the organizers of the sessions that we've had today. They've been very meaningful and educative, and I think it's been very brave of people to share experiences. And it behooves us to listen, it behooves us to do better, and it behooves us to learn. And like my colleagues who have already spoken, I do want to speak a little bit about thoughts on some of the principles that we could work into a charter. One of them is this concept of listening, learning, and acting in partnership. I think one of the things that we've heard and that we've listened to throughout this time is that you need to listen and work with folks who are asking for change, not assume you know what the change needs to be. And I think that partnership component is absolutely critical. And it's critical not only in terms of a founding principle of this, but also in terms of accountability. We may think that we are doing things that are meaningful and beneficial, but if we're hearing that they're not, we need to pivot. And we need to sort of have the humility, and also we need to stop, think, listen, and reconsult. And that one component, I think, is absolutely critical. The other thing is for leaders, and I think, I do want to comment on white leadership and non-Black peers. We have a responsibility to understand our privilege and what our privilege brings to the table. We also need to self-educate about privilege and to understand that not only do we have privilege through whiteness, but many of us have privilege through positions. And that means that we have positional power and we have the capacity to make change. And we likely have more power to make change with our colleagues than we think we do. And we ought not be stopped by barriers or excuses. We need to sort of look at what makes us stuck, and then we need to think through how to get unstuck and move things forward. Another concept, I think, is with privilege comes responsibility. And we have a responsibility to work with our colleagues to ensure that we're committed to a common set of values. And I think the Charter is an excellent opportunity for us to articulate a common sense of values and to work with those who choose to sign this Charter to embody those values and to operationalize those values, and not just within EDI offices. I think EDI offices are very important, as are human resources offices, provostial offices, and student offices. But as many of the speakers today will say, EDI and issues of anti-Black racism should be on the plate and focus of everybody, not just in one central office. So the other piece is discomfort. I think that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and we need to sit with that discomfort. And through that discomfort, we're going to learn, and we have to enable and facilitate people's learning through these processes so that we can come together as a community to make change. And in making that change, we have to make firm commitments to action. Words are insufficient. We have heard that from our community, and many times the question is, how do we act and what do we do? We need to look at the institutional structures. We look at policies, processes. We need to start to eliminate barriers and think about the ways in which we can formalize initiatives that promote Black excellence and pathways to inclusion and inclusiveness. And we also need to do that through very practical actions, such as mentorship and financial commitments to supporting initiatives. Because without those kinds of commitments, we aren't going to be able to operationalize many of the key things that we think are important. We also have to formally recognize the value of Black voices and Black excellences and create opportunities to amplify that. We know how to talk about excellence, but what we don't know is how to think critically about excellence and to embody a more broader understanding of excellence that breaks down some hierarchies and includes different types of conversations and creates spaces for those conversations. We also need to look at representation. And I think representation needs to be more than ensuring that we have a proportionate number of Black faculty, staff, or students within our population. Representation is important, but we also have to cultivate belonging, and we also have to look at retention. And I think some of the principles we need to think about are principles of belonging, principles around human rights, and principles of intention. We may bring people to our spaces, but are they spaces that they want to be in and that they feel included in and celebrated in? And finally, I echo Kofi in his comments about accountability and transparency. The Charter is an opportunity to be an external measure of accountability, to hold those of us who choose to sign to accountability. We also need to think about the inclusivity of decision-making and data. And the data will help us understand and articulate benchmarks and design strategies and allow for the delivery of best practices. And the final point that I'd like to make is around sustainability. We've had important talks over the last 2 days, and we've had important events and issues in our worlds over the last several months. But we need to sustain the dialogue in order to move it forward. So the question will be, what are our next steps to keep this alive in 3 years from now? So we act immediately, short term, and in the long term. Thank you.
Last speaker, before we go into the discussion component of this, is Maydianne Andrade, Vice Dean, Faculty Affairs, Equity and Success at the University of Toronto, Scarborough.
Thank you, Kimberly. So some powerful words throughout these sessions, and I thank you all for engaging in this way. This has been beyond our wildest dreams, I would say, in terms of a diversity of people coming together to speak with one voice. Not one voice that comes from us being the same, but one voice that comes from us centering the importance of this effort leading to real change. And so I'm going to focus mostly on teeth. How do we ensure that there are teeth? And to me, what that means is, how do we ensure that we create a charter that encourages, motivates, and requires post-secondary institutions in Canada to move from institutions that reinforce the status quo to agents of change? And I think the answer is that we need both carrots and sticks, and we needed them at all levels, individual, institutional, and national. And how do we ensure that these levers, as Marianne Chambers said in one discussion, how do we ensure that these levers are employed on a livable time scale? Ananya Mukherjee-Reid this morning said, how do we ensure we are bold and that you can live with what's happening? And I think the emphasis here is on pathways, that we're not talking about a goal that we reach at some particular point, but rather that we are making progress along a path that leads to justice. And to understand whether or not we're actually making progress, we need the data. I'm saying it again, we need the data, we need the data, we need the data. We need to use the data to build targets. What is our expectation if we have an institution that is not racist? What is our expectation? That is our target. And then we measure how we're doing with respect to moving towards those targets. We need to put that into the charter. So to change our institutions, we have to change from structures that center normative expectations of the student citizens that leave our walls, because they shape the institutions while they're here. And more than that, when they leave our walls, they shape societies, and they move from an institutional-centered life to a community-centered life, where what they do links all those levels. Individual, institutional, and national levels are linked. And I often think about this prayer for serenity I used to see on my grandmother's wall, long before memes on the internet, right? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. Long before Wisdom Tete was my boss. I thought this was profound as a child, but much later I began to see it as a prayer for passivity. And now I much prefer how Angela Davis framed it, as an invocation to action. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change, I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And that is the point of this charter. So it highlights something important that has been a thread through all the conversations I've listened to, and that is who determines the things that cannot be changed. How do we change that lens? Because right now, the determination of the things that cannot change lie with the statistical majority. And instead, the things that should remain the way they are, the things that should change, should depend on justice, should depend on human rights. And that also has to be at the center of our charter. This is what distinguishes a charter of this type from others, that we are focusing on anti-Black racism and we are focusing on Black inclusion because the Black experience is unique. This is the house that slavery built. Just like we focus in the TRC on indigeneity, because this is also the house that coloniality built. Those experiences are unique. But if we create a just set of institutions and national supports for those, we then become an inclusive society that admits all who want to join us. And that is really what we should aim at. So let me speak briefly about the teeth. We have levers in the current context. As Kofi said, there's a reason we're doing this now. The levers arise from deep pain. The levers arise from us watching brutality while everyone sat at home trying to protect each other. We need to use that lever. As Black people, we were feeling that pain all along. We need to leverage it because it allows people to connect in an emotional and humanistic way with the fact that justice is needed. If not now, then when? And if not through the things that we've brought up in this dialogue, then how are we going to accomplish it? So I encourage you to join us in speaking with one voice that encompasses our diversity, but that one voice is the voice of political pressure, and that is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Maydianne, and thank you to all the panelists. So I'm actually going to pick up where you left off, Maydianne, around who determines things that can be changed and who determines what can't be changed. We heard the themes around being courageous and bold and having levers and representation across the board, student, staff, faculty, and in decision-making spaces. The importance for data. I was facilitating co-facilitating the community session and alumni session, and we heard it there as well. But when we're talking about who determines these pieces, it takes us to the structural piece of this conversation. And how do we go about ensuring that we move forward with concrete actions that are changing structures, but are actually accountable to Black communities across the nation and not prescriptive, and that Black communities are actually part of this process without being over-consultated. So I'll open that up to the floor. Maydianne, I think I see you nodding.
I could just say briefly, I just finished, so I will be quiet in a minute, but Kofi's point about expertise is how we do that. And by expertise, we don't mean someone who comes in from outside. We mean, as Kofi said, someone with lived experience, but who also is educated in these issues, on how to change things, on how to engage the data that are already available in our communities, and the lived experience there, and then create a link to the structural change we need to see. So instead of putting it on whoever's available.
Kofi, thank you.
Yeah, I think I would really agree with that. It's a question that was posed actually in our session today. You know, should we really? Should is a hard question. Really, do we need to rely a bit more on internal expertise or external expertise? My own personal feeling to a large degree is that really each of us, most of us, has a great deal of expertise actually within our own walls already. That there are people within the institution who do this work, and not just who do this work, but who also have connections out in the community, which is really quite important. So external consultants may very well have their place, but they may not necessarily have what those faculty members have, which is really very close relationships with students, with student groups, and with those groups out in the community with whom we need to engage, and who can give us strength and expertise and intelligence and an awareness of actual on-the-ground facts. That, you know, let's be clear, that certainly by the time, if you've been a provost for 20 years and you're a white male, you're disconnected from that lived reality of being a Black person on the ground in, you know, Toronto or Kitchener or Brandon or wherever, you know what I'm saying? And so to me, it's really, it's a matter of taking advantage of the expertise that exists within our walls. And I'll just say on a last point that, you know, often it's framed as we need to bring in external people because, you know, it's fairer that way. It's, you know, it's not quite the same battle. And I find that that they're more neutral, right? That they're more neutral in some way. So I would say to that two things. First of all, do you really want someone who's neutral about racism doing your anti-racism work? Whoever's doing that work should be outraged. They should not be neutral. And second of all, the fact that an institution thinks of it that way, I think is very telling because it portrays it in some ways as a conflict between the institution and its faculty, or between the institution and its students. And really, I think we need to start thinking about it much more as a joint battle, that we are all in this together trying to shape our collective space. It is not us against you. You may have to hear things you don't want to hear. We may have to hear things we don't want to hear. But that unless we're willing to do that in the first place, we're wasting everyone's time trying to do this work. But we have to be willing to hear those hard things and to do what it takes. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And then Kelly.
Yeah, let me build on it a little bit. I think that's a really great question. Who determines what can be changed? And the answer is usually us as a community. And we too often rely on a sense that there are structural pieces that cannot be changed. And so we fail to actually ask the question. And I would put into that, you know, we have principles in the in universities and colleges that we seem to hold sacrosanct without actually unpacking them. Academic freedom is an interesting one as an example. Primacy of our disciplinary views of what excellence looks like. And sometimes for senior administrators, it's all too easy for us to say, well, the committee recommended this, they must know. But we're actually in that point playing into the structure of where decision is being taken without asking who determines what can be changed. So a much more inclusive approach internally is what we need. And I agree with that comment about the internal expertise that we have. But I do want to say that broader external community needs to be brought into that as well. And I just want to take the example of a number of colleagues that I have at St. Mary's who are really working hard to take the lived experience of community engagement and to see that valued in processes for tenure and promotion. And that's really important. It doesn't sit as a necessarily high profile item in a checklist, but it's something that we need to recognize, that engagement with community, in our case, with the African Nova Scotian community or with communities of African descent and First Nations. We need to find ways to recognize that, because that's how we determine what can be changed. It is us, and engaging that is a really important part of what we are learning out of the last 2 days.
Thank you. Kelly?
Thank you. I'll just build on some of that and what was said. And that I think when we look at change, very often institutions and cultures move slowly, but we're looking at what we can't do versus what we can do. And I think when we're looking for change, we have to be looking at what's possible. And so just because there's a barrier there, it doesn't mean we ought not break it down, or that we ought not open a conversation. And it also precludes a discussion of thinking about who benefits from the change. And we all benefit from that change. And so asking for a change or identifying a barrier is not a bad thing. And it's something that should be an opener to a conversation. And I think we need to sort of think really carefully about how can we be responsive as issues are raised. It may very well be that a particular policy is frozen or it's difficult to do it, but there are guidelines, there's practices, and there's best practices. And I think it's important for us to listen and think about what's possible. And we do that with excellence. Universities, colleges will all be adhering to the concept of excellence, but we can change what excellence means. And we can add to excellence a greater understanding of what others think excellence is and what's missing for our sort of narrow perceptions of that.
Thank you. And that conversation around equity and excellence that usually comes up, and equity enhances excellence. They're not usually exclusive. Marie-Claude, I think I saw your hand up.
Just very briefly on this notion of excellence and how it's important to recognize that words matter, but that they are also dynamic and that they constantly need to be reviewed. The Charter is a welcome opportunity to make us rethink language, but we can never be satisfied with a black letter approach, meaning what the words say. We have to constantly review and rethink what those words mean and apply them to context, and remain open to the fact that we may have to rethink certain notions. So from excellence, we may have to think that inclusive excellence is a better approach. And in a few years from now, we may have to evolve when we take a new look at our reality and whether it's changed or not, and perhaps recognize that we need to adapt the language even further to move us into action. So I think it's important to never see words as something that's stagnant. Words are actions, and they have to be looked at as living representations of where we are.
Words and language are actions, and they're powerful, and they can be violent as well and be used to oppress. So it's important for us to think about what that looks like and actually review and come up for the Charter actionable items to remove that language and come up with new language. And maybe that's something that we can consider adding into the Charter. We have about 6-7 minutes. So I wanted to just change the lens quickly about timelines. So Kelly, you had mentioned changes and that universities and post-secondary institutions, colleges work very slowly. The time is now, however. And for the Black community, we have been living and breathing and doing this work for a very long time. What are some actual timelines that can be included in this Charter to get us through, so that this is not just a dialogue that's happened over 2 days and that people go back to their lives as business as usual on Monday, but we actually start to advance this? And what are some of the timelines we can think about including? Go ahead, Kelly.
I think it's immediate. I think that there are some things that we already know and that our community has already told us. There are recommendations, there's task force, there's groups. We know they're there, and they still resonate, and they're still meaningful, and we have not been responsive enough, and we need to do better. So I think that we need to be pushed to be making immediate change. And I also think that the Charter needs to push us to demonstrate a commitment through those changes. And I think that those who are evaluating change or how far we've changed ought to be part of the community for whom the changes are being meant to benefit. So I really do think that it ought to be immediate. And I would hope that there are things in progress that could be amplified, redirected, or pivoted on, like today, tomorrow. But I also think that we need to have short-term and long-term goals to know where are we going and what are we trying to reach. And once we're there, reevaluate how much further we need to go and what we now need to do. And recognize that not all changes will necessarily work. And therefore we need to rethink, not give up on those kinds of changes. So I think it's now is the timeline. It's not a year from now.
Any other thoughts? Go ahead. Maydianne, Kofi, and then Robert.
I think the transparency piece and the idea of shared best practices is really important here, because that pathway that institutions are traveling at different rates, starting from different places, to be able to share that information not only gives people innovative ideas for how to apply it in their own context, but it's some of the teeth, right? Transparency in whether you're doing things and in whether you're making progress. If you're not making progress, back to first principles and try something different.
Thank you. Kofi.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I really love that answer of now. Right? Like, I mean, obviously we need medium and long term as well, but often we hide behind the fact of it's not the right time, or in fact, we don't have the resources. And I just want to point out that yes, there's always the time and the resources. If you're hiring this year, you can hire an Indigenous faculty member, you can hire a Black faculty member. If you're hiring an administrator this year, you can hire a Black administrator this year. So the time is now, absolutely. That's really such an excellent point. And the resources are there. If you're doing any of these things right now, you can really do this in a way that is inflected in a way that is beneficial to Black, Indigenous, and other and BIPOC people as well. So thank you for that.
Robert?
Get myself on mute here. Those resources are there, and those are actions that really put us almost a 8 to 12 month time frame. I want to comment too that there are so many things that are underway. I mean, we have a very good standing committee on the prevention of racism that's carried out all sorts of actions, listening circles, and their work is underway right now. Many of them are on the line as we speak this afternoon. And so those actions are there. And I think that's important that we recognize that as institutions, that we all have things that are underway. And so the different stages, if you like, of where we are is going to be important. But some of these timelines are in fact immediate right now. And that's a key call for us as we develop the Charter.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you all to answer this question as we wrap up. What immediate action are you going to advocate for when you go back to the office on Monday? Robert?
So I'm going to be, and my committee doesn't know this, I'm going to be calling them all together and hopefully with other participants from my university in the last 2 days, and to bring a convening, to convene people to say, okay, what are the next steps for us? How does this dialogue change? And how do we think about how we will respond and provide further input into the development of the Charter itself?
Thank you. Marie-Claude?
As I indicated in my conclusion, I think it starts with realizing that dialogue is a verb. It's something that needs to be kept alive. And at the University of Montreal, I think that some of that dialogue has started, but it has to be. We have to be sure that it can be kept alive. So I will discuss with my colleagues, and some have been writing to me during this session to convene or to find a way that we can keep the dialogues going. It would be a shame that we would reminisce our time in October of 2020 when we held dialogues. I think it's something that has to be kept alive in our own institutions.
Thank you.
That's what I'll be suggesting.
Kelly?
I think one of the things that we need to do most immediately is to work with some of our colleagues who've been on this call, some of our non-Black peers, and have a conversation with them about where they see themselves in this space and what role they see themselves as playing as we move toward change. And I think that dialogue and conversation is an important one. and for having people think about what we can do differently. And I also think we need to start to create more spaces for dialogue and discussion within our own universities, and asking folks about the things that we've tried to do and whether or not those things are meaningful.
Thank you. Maydianne?
This is perhaps cheating, but as I've done for the last 2.5 years, I'll be sending out a special call for faculty, for departments that want to hire Black or Indigenous faculty over and above the normal complement plan, and then I will be pushing our dean, principal, and provost to expand the number of those slots for next year.
Thank you. And Kofi, the last word is with you, and then I'll just wrap up the session.
Thank you. I'll be arguing very strongly more directly for resources for the people who are charged primarily with doing this work on our campuses right now. We know that often those departments are under-resourced and they've got a lot of work to do. And so we need to support them much better. And that will be my sort of immediate argument, to give them the time and the space to be able to do this work while being able to retain their sanity, their health.
That last part is so critical. Well, thank you all. We are out of our time. This was just the start of a conversation that I know is going to last beyond today. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to share, and I look forward to continuing this work and advancing anti-Black racism and Black excellence and Black inclusion within post-secondary and beyond. We are not finished. We have a plenary talk with a wrap up and next steps that will be provided by Wisdom Teti, Vice President, University of Toronto, and Principal, U of T Scarborough, and Karima Hashmani, Executive Director, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. So over to Wisdom and Karima.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's been an amazing couple of days, and I and my team here are very privileged that we've had the pleasure of hosting all of you at the University of Toronto. I said to you at the beginning that those of us at U of T came to this with a profound sense of humility, knowing that we're doing our part, but our part is not good enough, and that we wanted to come together with others who share our convictions about a just, inclusive academic community to see how we could work together. And I think that we can say we've gained from the experience, that the ability to convene such a committed group of people to engage in this issue has enriched our understanding, our knowledge, and our ideas about how we may proceed. So on behalf of the University of Toronto, I want to thank all of you for that opportunity and for believing that we can together do something that is meaningful and that is impactful. We hope that the last couple of days have been valuable for you as well, that they've been productive and enriching for you. It certainly has given you the opportunity to hear many truths, some of which are not palatable to us as institutions to hear, but nevertheless define the lives that people within our communities live every day. And I think that it behooves us to applaud them for the courage to share and the willingness to work with us to address those challenges and those blots on our conscience, but also on what our mission is supposed to be. I think more importantly, this has afforded an opportunity to acknowledge those truths, for us to engage in critical introspection and reflection that puts us on the track of making amends, of becoming better, of enhancing what it is that our mission is meant to do. The deliberations for me demonstrate the wealth of community and the value of inclusion. I think everybody who's left here has made a contribution to that shared understanding, that shared knowledge, but it's also leaving here enriched by what they've gained by having people around the table. And if we're looking for palpable evidence of what inclusive excellence means, I think the last couple of days have shown us what that could look like, and that we have an opportunity to amplify what we have gained as a result of the coming together of different people in the same space with a singular purpose of facilitating inclusive excellence. I think people have made the point over the course of the last 2 days that inclusion and excellence are not opposites. They are, in fact, such as can be made to work together in an integrated fashion that enhances who we are as those who are on the frontiers of knowledge production, as those who cultivate future leaders, as those who society looks to advance what it is that makes us a community of forward thinking and self-sustaining. And so for me, there could be no better expression of inclusive excellence than what we've seen in the last couple of days. I think it's important as we leave here to sustain the momentum, to network, to mobilize in support of the principles and goals that you've heard articulated in the last few minutes. It is that momentum that is going to sustain us. It's that momentum that is going to ensure that the principles and actions that we pull together from the deliberations are in fact going to be supported by the accountability mechanisms that we have. Accountability is not a reified term. It is enabled by the people who are behind it and push it. And we are the people. We are the ones who belong to different associations. We're the ones who belong to disciplines. We're the ones who shape curricula. And we're the ones who drive decisions. And as much as majority of the people here may be on the margins of that, I think by bringing together the full panoply of our community, that we all are able to make difference depending on where we are in our small ways. And together we can then enable change that is impactful. So what we want to do next is to continue to hear from you. And so next week, you're going to get a survey for some feedback that we'll be able to incorporate into the charter. The charter itself is going to be a participatory and transparent process, which we started yesterday. And throughout the process, you all have been able to make your contributions to the development of that charter. And some people have asked me about why it's called the Scarborough National Charter. And I want to take this opportunity to share, part of the rationale. Part of it is very simple, is the fact that, as you all know, that much of the work, in terms of logistics and administration has been here. If we were doing this in person, you'd all have come to Scarborough to be part of this process. But at a more substantive and in fact symbolic level, Scarborough, just by accident or coincidence of geography and the reality of the demographic group we're talking about, that Scarborough has a significant number of Black people. It is also one of the most diverse communities you can find anywhere in this country. And so in a substantive sense of representing the group that we're talking about, Scarborough, fortunately for us, there's this coincidence of location and the people who matter in this conversation. I think it also symbolizes the commitment to honoring the people that we're talking about. And that Scarborough, just as the Black community across the country is marginalized, Scarborough is as well. And there's an opportunity to elevate and to say they deserve a place in this conversation, and that they are reflective of the many Black communities across our country from coast to coast to coast who live the realities that we're talking about. So that is part of the reason. It was important to also include in this the fact that it is national in scope. So it is anchored in place and experience, but is amplified at the national level. So what we'll do is the co-leads and panelists will distill the deliberations. We will work together with our interinstitutional advisory committee, and we will reach out to you since we cannot write a charter of 3,000 plus people, that this work will be done by a select number of folks who represent the different conversations that have happened over the last couple of days. And this will be made available to you when it's done for commentary. And this is open to all of you, as well as our external partners who have a say in the matter. And once that is done, we will then engage with our institutional partners who have committed to signing off on the goals of the charter and make sure that at some point, not in the too distant future, we're able to bring to reality all the things that you have worked hard over the last couple of days to pull together. I want to make the point, though, that we don't have to wait for the charter to begin the work that we've talked about. These 2 days have allowed you to learn. That was part of the essence of this, to see best practices, to see what you can begin to do right now, even as we work together to formulate a charter. So please go ahead, do what you need to do to get things moving, because the work is necessary, the cost is right, the value of inclusive excellence is not in doubt. We have an obligation to act, and that obligation is driven by the imperative to do what is right. So it's absolutely critical that we embody and become vocal proponents of an equity-deserving ethos for inclusive excellence. That will give us the courage to do what is right, the conviction to stand for what is right and to stand with it, the humility to be learning organizations in the true sense, willing to change structures, processes, practices, and cultures. The openness to enabling spaces for other experiences, perspectives, forms of excellence, and ways of knowing beyond what has been accorded pride of place is what is going to make us better institutions and a better sector, able to serve our communities in the best way possible. So we need to have the boldness to upset the apple cart for the common good, so that inclusive excellence can be nurtured, sustained, and promoted. Action will not drive itself. Action is yearning to be unleashed. And so we should go forth individually and collectively to do our part as agents of the change that is needed to enable substantive inclusive excellence, and not just the rhetoric of its feel-good version. This is not the end of the dialogues on anti-Black racism and Black inclusion. It will continue in different ways and in different forms. We at the University of Toronto are committed to doing our part to sustain these conversations, but also to enable the kinds of actions that are necessary for all of us to do. So on that note, I want to thank you, but I'm going to leave it to Karima to bring some final words and to be able to express our gratitude in the best way possible within the traditions of the University of Toronto. So over to you, Karima.
Thank you, Wisdom. So I just wanted to share a few thoughts. Today was filled with inspiring conversations, as Wisdom mentioned, in all of our sessions that were innovative, collaborative, and ideas that could be easily incorporated into the Scarborough National Charter. As Teresa Rajagtelli asked us all about transformative institutions. And really, I think we want a transformative sector that is bold, innovative, and ready to commit to systemic change and accountable to our students and communities. We all learned about the key components that will establish the Scarborough National Charter from our past plenary that our institution can sign on to and be part of in terms of principles, actions, and accountabilities. But as Wisdom mentioned, we don't have to wait for the charter to do the work. We can create things now, create equity within our practices, our processes that are based on human rights principles. The work can start now, working with students, faculty, and staff. That is work that is recognized, creating recommendations in partnership, and create accountabilities with timelines. And my hope is that you will all connect with this network to transform the sector to be truly inclusive. Today, we have worked to co-create this charter that will engage and lead our institutions with accountability through the values of EDI and inclusive excellence. So let's build on this moment. Before we all sign off, I want to thank all the attendees for joining us today, nationally, and engaging in these conversations. Thank you to the panelists and the participants for your contributions, innovating on the spot, and sharing your insight from your experiences. To the Planning Committee for dedicating your time to the development of these 2 days, for facilitating these meaningful and rich conversations in your sessions, and ensuring our conversations were guided in addressing systemic change, including principles, actions, and accountabilities. Thank you. I would also like to give thanks to the Interinstitutional Advisory Committee for your input, insight into guiding these dialogues and your thoughtful plenary discussions. To our institutional partners and leads that have signed on to partnering with us, thank you for your support and partnership, and we look forward to collaborating once the charter is developed. To the team that made everything possible behind the scenes, the planning, the event, and the communications teams, thank you for your help getting us here and managing all the important details. We know these conversations take a toll on folks, so after this, I hope you get to log off and engage in some self-care. We look forward to your collaboration to create and lead systemic change nationally and within our institutions. Thank you so much.